sound?
Huh?
That sound. Don't you hear it? It's like I'm standing in the middle of a factory.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's just my brain.
What are you talking about?
Well, the gears in my brain, they always make a racket when I have to think extra hard. Like now, while I'm trying to get my tax return finished.
Even though our minds don't really function like gears in a machine, the sign for thinking is based on the picture of our minds turning like a gear in a machine. Most signs for thought processes create imaginative pictures of how our mind is working, like this picture of lots of thoughts emerging from the brain which are necessary to be inventive. Or this picture of a thought you are dreaming that floats from your mind. The sign for dream. What's that?
I finally understand how I'm supposed to report the sale of my thresher in amortization schedule B12.
Can you picture a light bulb illuminating in your mind as I sign understand?
I need a break. What's on TV?
Point to your mind, and this is the same sign for brain. Think is just like the natural gesture for think, but you show that you are thinking by moving your index finger in a circle as if it were a gear turning in your head. This turning movement is also the sign for consider, which you can make with one index finger or two. Change only your facial expression, and consider is now the sign for wonder. Use the R to sign reason, the P to sign philosophy. You learn the sign for same. When we are thinking the same or thinking alike, we are agreeing. You learn the sign for opposite. When we're thinking opposite of each other, we are disagreeing. You learn the sign for marry. We could say that a person is married to a strongly held belief. You learn the sign for judge as the scales of justice was weighing the facts. When you think and finish weighing the facts, you have decided. You may also use the letter D to make this sign. If I expect something, I think everything will fall into place. With a more hopeful facial expression, it becomes the sign for hope. You thought of a goal, and there it is. High, but not out of reach. When you strongly think your expectations will come true, you're demonstrating that you have faith. Show it by making the sign for think, then grasp what you're expecting when it arrives, as it surely will. Just grasping onto your expectations is a sign for trust. Use the letter I to show an idea coming out of your brain. The sign for suppose is similar to the sign for idea, but the idea is just developing, and I show it like this. This is also the sign for if, when used to mean suppose. If I were in charge, then you'd see some changes. You need lots of thoughts emerging from your brain to invent something. I show that my ideas are imaginative by moving the letter I out of my mind in a more creative way. Use the letter O to sign opinion. Use the letter T to sign theory. Use the letter C to sign concept. I combine the movements of invent and imagination to show creative ideas. Can you picture the thoughts of a pleasant dream floating up from your mind? Making a question mark with your index finger here should communicate puzzled. A suspicion is like an itchy thought that needs to be scratched. My thinking is turned upside down. I'm confused.
Sign language is not a slave to pronouns. If several sentences refer to the same subject and topic, we can mention the subject once and forget about signing the same pronoun over and over again. That is until the topic changes. For example, let's talk about Ralph's new job. I can say, Ralph got a job. He's a ski instructor. Teaches children, loves his job. Loves being outside, and on and on and on.
Until the specific topic changes from Ralph's job to something else, like Ralph's living accommodations. My cousin Jane lives near Ralph. She bought a condo, paid $125,000, has a 15-year mortgage at 8%. Bought a waterbed, and on and on and on and on until the topic changes.
In the following practice sentences, some pronouns that are already clear to you will be deleted. This will make the grammatical sentences more conversational.
A thought from a smart person is really powerful. This is also the sign for intelligent. A wise person has very deep thoughts. A person teaches by taking his or her own thoughts and putting them into the minds of others. For the generic sign for inform, take thoughts from your mind and distribute them widely. This is also the sign for news. Here I am compressing a great amount of information into a small amount of information. When you exaggerate, you stretch out the information. We often learn by taking the information from the pages of a book and pulling it into our minds. The sign for student is the sign for learner. Sign learn followed by the person sign. A commonly accepted metaphor for understanding is a light bulb going on in your mind. If I misunderstand, I'm confusing one thought with another. When I know something, it's safely stored in my mind. When we don't know the answer, we may just grab a thought from midair and make a guess. This is also the sign for miss. Take a thought from your mind and tack it down like this. It almost looks like you're sticking it on a Post-it to remember. Take a thought and hold it tightly to memorize it. You can emphasize something by highlighting it on paper. Think of your forehead as a slate that's wiped clean of all of its information when you forget.
The sign for expect is also the sign for hope, even though their meanings differ. I expect cooperation. I hope for cooperation. I expect snow. I hope for snow. The context and your facial expression will help to distinguish expect from hope.
We'll also continue to delete redundant pronouns when we sign the practice sentences, and we'll continue to do so in the remaining lessons.
In this wrap-up, we'll teach you a few more signs for thought processes. We'll also show you the signs for honor and respect, which begin at the head, since we learn what to respect and honor.
We know who and what to respect. Form the letter R on both hands and begin the sign with your right hand near your head. Move your hands forward in the direction of someone you respect. We know who and what to honor. Form the letter H on both hands and begin the sign with your right hand near your head. Move your hands forward in the direction of someone you honor. A brilliant person has a mind that shines like this. A genius has a brain that exceeds the boundaries of his or her skull. A nitwit, or an extremely dim-witted person, has the brain the size of a pea. This sign is based on the signs for dumb and jail. A stupid person's mind is confined in jail.
I think, therefore I am.
Way back in Lesson 8, you learned a few signs that look like the feelings they represent, like eager, fed up, sad, cold, and ugly. You also got an early preview of this lesson when you learned the signs for some other feelings that don't look like the feelings they represent. Feelings like happy, hot, and beautiful. These signs are based on imaginative pictures of our feelings in action.
When you sign happy, picture happy feelings rising in your chest.
Or, signs for feelings are based on an association between the sign and the feeling.
We can create an association between hot and hot food. When we put hot food in our mouths, our natural reaction is to remove it. Hot. We can also create a logical association between beauty and someone's face. Beautiful.
In this lesson, you learn more signs for feelings based on imaginative pictures of our feelings in action, like depressed, showing our feelings sink, and excited, showing our feelings jumping out of our chests.
You'll also learn more signs for feelings that are based on associations between a sign and a feeling, like the association between holding the world on your shoulder and feeling responsible, and the association between stabbing pains and the feeling of pain or pain.
Ow! Do that again, and the next association you'll be seeing is between you and St. Peter. We smile and laugh when something is funny, and that makes our noses wrinkle. This could be why brushing the tip of the nose with the index and middle fingers becomes a sign for funny. The sign for fun starts where the sign for funny left off. Slide off the tip of your nose and land on your index and middle fingers. The idea is that fun is built from the things that are funny. When you're embarrassed, red rises up in your cheeks. When you're ashamed, you want to hide behind your hands so no one will see you. This is also the sign for shy, because a shy person also wants to hide. A selfish person is always pulling everything toward himself. Can you picture a jealous person who is jealous of someone else's possessions, wiping a bit of drool from the corner of his mouth? Remember the sign for dark? Let your hands represent dark clouds passing in front of you as a metaphor for trouble. This is also the sign for worry. If you're disappointed, your frown may make an indentation in your chin. The sign for frustrated is based on the metaphor of always having doors slam in your face. Remember the sign for hard? Someone who is strict is often called hard-nosed. Patient people often keep their lips sealed rather than criticize or lash out. Pulling your thumb down your lips and your chin emphasizes the F that goes into being patient. This is also a sign for tolerant and suffering. When we are responsible, we feel that we have a large weight on our shoulder. You'll often see people use the letter R sign responsible. This is also the sign for obligation and burden, which are signed without initials. When we forgive someone, we are wiping the slate clean of all her transgressions. When we excuse someone, we only need to wipe the slate clean for a particular transgression. A person's head and stomach are most common places to feel normal sickness. Use the middle fingers of both hands to show these two locations ailing with a facial expression that says, "I'm sick." Move your hand in front of your face to show the loss of equilibrium we feel when we become dizzy. Along with the right facial expression, move your open hand around your stomach and show the feeling of nausea. Your facial expression will distinguish the sign for disgusted from the sign for nauseated as you move your open hand around your chest. Index fingers are used in several signs to represent knives. Point knives at each other and move them to the location of the pain, such as the head or the stomach. Thrust them repeatedly at each other to show the jabbing pain. The contents of your stomach flip-flop when your stomach is upset. Warmth is represented by the warmth of human breath. In some parts of the country, you'll also see this as another common sign for warm. When some condition has gotten better, we know how much it has improved by using our arm as a measuring device. When some condition has gotten worse, we show how much it has deteriorated using our arm as a measuring device. When we are moving steadily forward, we are making progress. Can you picture a couple alternately caressing each other's hand? Or you can just caress your own hands to put yourself in a relaxed, comfortable state.
We may be a little late on this one, but it's worth mentioning anyway. About is another one of those words like on and off and up and down that you sometimes sign and sometimes don't. Back in Lesson 12, we signed 2 sentences that didn't include about as a part of the action, so you had to sign about in research about felines and stories about Paul and Carla.
But in the previous lesson, you practiced several sentences that did include about as part of the action. So you didn't have to sign about when we agreed about Republicans and disagreed about Democrats, and had to decide what to write about. Well, in this lesson, you'll encounter about again when someone is concerned about, worried about, and excited about something. I purposely didn't sign these actions so you could decide for yourself as you encounter these sentences.
In future lessons, you'll need to decide whether or not to sign about in talk about, think about, be an expert about, and get home about. Just think visually and let your signing flow. If you need a sign to express your meaning, put it in. If not, leave it out. This principle applies well beyond whether or not to sign about, so please always keep it in mind. Back in Lesson 9, you learned the sign for mirror. The sign for mirror is also the sign for seem, and another sign for appear, since a mirror reflects what things seem to be or appear to be.
That's it. When you're proud, a strong feeling rises up through your chest. When you're depressed, your feelings sink. If you get excited, feelings jump out of your chest. Use the letter E and the sign for excited becomes the sign for emotion. Use the letter A and the sign for excited becomes ambition. Use your middle fingers to represent unwelcome things hitting you and causing you concern. Think of all your fingers as rays of evil that are covering your body, making you feel afraid. When I get angry, my feelings travel up from the pit of my stomach all the way up to my face, where any facial expression is unmistakably angry. I'm truly content when all of my feelings are quietly resting within my body. This is also the sign for satisfied. Your feelings of contentment flip-flop when you're emotionally upset. When you admit something, you're figuratively getting something off your chest. Think of yourself leading your face to all the various directions of your curiosity. Think of your feelings of interest pulling you toward what you're interested in. You'll also see some people signing interested by pulling one hand from the chest and the other from the face. When you like something, your feelings pull you toward it. When you dislike something, you sign like, then flick away what you dislike. Flick away what you hate with much greater intensity. You show that you have pity for others because you get in touch with your heart and provide sympathy to them. This is also the sign for sympathy. Caressing your chest with both hands communicates that you are enjoying yourself. Use one hand for please, as in please and thank you. Sign please with the letter A and it becomes the sign for sorry. Why the letter A? It's much more comfortable to sign against your chest, and sign language tends to make accommodations for easier signing. Tapping your index finger over your heart lays your conscience over your heart. Sign conscience with the letter G, and it becomes a sign for guilty. Since religion comes from the heart, touch the letter R to your heart and bring it forward. Circle the letter C over your heart and place it on your heart to represent your character. Use the letter P for personality. Use the letter A for attitude.
Back in Lesson 9, you learned the sign for mirror. The sign for mirror is also the sign for seem, and another sign for appear, since a mirror reflects what things seem to be or appear to be.
That's it.
we want to show you a sign that's an imaginative picture of a personal quality, honesty. We also want to show you some signs that describe situations you might encounter that are, all right, tough, difficult, a problem, or worse. Finally, we want to show you the sign for God, and it seemed most appropriate to include this sign along with signs for feelings and emotions. So, if you're feeling up to it, let's get started.
Many people think of an honest person as someone traveling through life on a straight and narrow pathway. Honest. Many people think things are all right if they can travel straight down the middle of life without anything pushing them off course. All right. Think of the sign for hard when you make the sign for tough. Hit the rock and slide off, showing that the task of climbing it is so tough you're falling off. When you sign difficult, think of two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. With so many pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, it's difficult to find two that match. This is another sign for hard, meaning difficult. When you sign problem, think about trying to put two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together. Problem. The sign for worse is similar to the sign for multiply because the situation becomes worse when things that go wrong are multiplied by some number. The situation becomes the worst when the things that go wrong are multiplied even more. The sign God is based on us praying to God. But in the sign for God, we use only one hand as we pray to God. You already learned the sign for Earth, showing the Earth on its axis, and the sign for world, showing the Earth revolving around the sun. In this lesson, you'll create pictures that show other time concepts like sunrise with the sun coming up over the horizon, and sunset with the sun going down over the horizon.
You've also learned that many time-related signs are based on the concept of a timeline, with the past behind us, the present directly in front of us, and the future ahead of us. In this lesson, you'll learn more signs based on the concept of a timeline, like tomorrow, by making this small motion in the direction of future time, and yesterday, by making this small motion in the direction of past time.
And you've learned that many signs are based on associations that bring the sign to mind. You learned that signing grow makes us think of the sign for spring,
because new plants grow in the spring.
And you learned that the sign for cold is also the sign for winter,
because we are cold in the winter.
Now you'll learn the associations that are the basis for the signs for summer. And autumn. Try miming that one. You're good. Show how leaves fall to the base of the trees in the autumn. You learn the sign for dry. This time you want to dry your brow, which is constantly wet from the summer heat. This is the horizon. See the sun coming up in the morning? At noon, the sun is directly overhead. The sun is past its noon position. The distance after noon tells us how late in the afternoon it is. 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock. The sun has gone down over the horizon. This is also the sign for evening. We eat breakfast in the morning. We eat lunch at noon. We eat dinner in the evening. This is also the sign for supper. The sun rising over the horizon. The sun going down over the horizon. The sun moving across the sky is a sign for day. You'll also see people using the letter D to sign day. Use the concept of a calendar to show a week. My hand is the page of the calendar, and I'm indicating the 7 days across the calendar, or 1 week. Sign week and end. Think of your index finger as the rows of weeks in a calendar. Moving your other index finger down indicates all the weeks of the month. This is the sun and this is the earth. It takes 1 year for the earth to travel around the sun. The sign for now, followed by the sign for day, means today. Or you can sign today. The sign for now, followed by the sign for night, means tonight. The clock strikes 12 at midnight. Think of time as a timeline beginning behind us and extending out in front of us. Yesterday is a small motion in the direction of past time. Think of time as a timeline beginning behind us and extending out in front of us. Tomorrow is a small motion in the direction of future time. When we postpone something, we push the time of the event from the present to the future. This is also the sign for delay. You learned that many time-related signs are based on the concept of a timeline, with the past behind us and the present in front of us. When we use the word since, we mean from the time sometime in the past up to the present. This is also the sign for up till now and all along. When we sign the word while, we mean that two events are happening all at the same time. This is also the sign for during. The A is commonly used to represent a person or a thing. In this sign, two people or things are continuing with their activity. Extend your thumbs and pinkies on both hands and make this forward motion from the present into the future to show that something is still happening. When we sign the word until, we mean from sometime in the present to sometime in the future. Until. You learn first and second. The sign for then is first, then second. When the speed of this sign is slower, it's also the sign for or. You learned the sign for birth way back in Lesson 5. You learned the sign for happy in Lesson 8. Well, we finally made it to this lesson about time concepts in which, of course, we find the sign for day. So, happy birthday to all of you whose birthdays came before this momentous occasion. But perhaps you were sly enough to ask someone to show you the sign for day when you needed it. This is actually a learning strategy called just-in-time learning. We call it just-in-time learning because we often remember a concept best just at the time when we really need it.
Just one more thing before we let you go. Remember back in Lesson 10 when we mentioned that sometimes the sign for just is the same sign as only, and sometimes just is the same sign as recently? Well, in this lesson, you'll use just as a synonym for recently.
Form the number 2 while signing minute to indicate 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, or 4 minutes. Form the number 2 while signing hour to indicate 2 hours, or 4 hours, or 5 hours. Form the number 2 while signing day to indicate 2 days, or 3 days, or 5 days. Form the number 2 while signing week to indicate 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. Form the number 2 while signing month to indicate 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. Form the number 2 as you extend the sign for week into the future to mean in 2 weeks, or in 4 weeks, or in 5 weeks. From this final position in the sign for year, use your index finger to move into the future to mean next year. From the final position for the sign for year, use the number 2 and move it into the future to indicate in 2 years, or in 3 years, or in 4 years. Move the sign for week back into the past to mean last week. Form the number 2 as you move the sign for week back into the past time to mean 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago. In the past, plus month means last month. Form the number 2 as you sign month, but move the sign over the shoulder to show past time, meaning 2 months ago, 4 months ago, 5 months ago. From the final position for the word year, move your index finger over your shoulder to indicate past time and mean last year. From this final position in the sign for year, form the number 2 and move it back into the past time to mean 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Repeatedly sign this modified sign for tomorrow to change the meaning to many tomorrows or every day. This is also the sign for daily. Repeatedly signing month changes the meaning to every month or monthly. Modify the sign for year and repeatedly flick your index finger into the future time to sign every year or yearly or annually.
Sign language combines numbers and time-related signs to express how many minutes or hours or weeks or years into a single sign. So instead of signing 2 minutes, you'd sign 2 minutes, or 2 hours, or 2 weeks, or 2 years.
You can also combine numbers, time-related signs, and the sign language concept of directionality to show how many weeks or months or years in the past or into the future. So instead of signing 2 weeks in the future, you'd sign in 2 weeks or in 2 years. Instead of signing 2 weeks in the past, you'd sign 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago or 2 years ago.
Be careful though, and don't overgeneralize, because you can't apply these techniques to all time-related signs. Some signs are produced in a way that would make it awkward to be condensed into a single sign, like 10 years in the future or 2 days ago.
The lesson was getting a bit long, so we saved the time-related signs that include the signing feature of duration for this wrap-up.
Slow and extend the movement in the sign for day to indicate an activity or condition lasting all day. Extend the duration of the sun in the morning sky by moving your hand from left to right. This communicates an activity or condition that lasts all morning. Show the movement of the sun from noon until dusk to communicate an activity or condition lasting all afternoon. Extend the duration of the evening to all evening by moving your hand from right to left. This indicates an activity or condition that lasts all evening. Visualize the sun going across the sky on the opposite side of the world to communicate an activity or condition lasting all night. You learned that lots of signs are based on associations between a sign and something that brings that sign to mind. For example, in the last lesson we reminded you of associations that bring the signs for winter and spring to mind, and taught you associations for summer and winter in this lesson. I know I'm going to be sorry I asked. In fact, I'm already sorry, but what is that white bow?
Oh, this. Nothing really. It's just supposed to remind me to go to my dental appointment at 8. If I didn't put this on, trust me, I'd never remember to go.
Oh, okay. In this lesson...
You see, this ribbon is white, so of course that reminds me of Betty White. You know, one of the Golden Girls who lived in Miami? Where they have the Marlins baseball team that won the World Series in 1997, which adds up to 8 when you add all the numbers together. 1 plus 9 plus 9 plus 7 equals 26, and the 2 plus 6 in 26 equals 8, which reminds me to show up for my dental appointment at 8 with Dr. Green.
Dr. Green? Wouldn't it just be easier to wear a green ribbon? Because...
I'd show up at 6 instead of 8.
Because?
Dr. Green is in the TV show ER, which is in Chicago, which has the Chicago Bears, which won the Super Bowl in 1986.
I knew I'd be sorry I asked. In this lesson, you'll learn associations between signs and logical associations that bring the signs to mind.
But we're all different people with different backgrounds and experiences, so all of the associations we provide may not be the best associations for you. When they don't, you have two choices. One is to accept the association we show you and use it somehow to bring the sign to mind, or 2, create your own association if it works better for you, provided you still produce the sign clearly and accurately.
And if you wore a brown ribbon?
7, Murphy Brown, Washington, D.C. Old Washington Bullets, 1978 NBA Championship. 1 plus 9 plus 7 plus 8 is 25. And 2 plus 5 is 7, 7 o'clock.
Gray.
Linda Gray, Dallas Cowboys. Could show up just about any time I wanted to.
You already learned the sign for rainbow. Wiggle the colors of the rainbow in front of your mouth for the sign for color. Intermingle the colors of the rainbow, and you won't exactly get the color gray, but you get the sign for gray. Move your index finger from your lips, representing the color red. Pink is a variation of the sign for red. Form the letter P and move it down across your lips, representing the color pink. Gold is shiny and is often used to make earrings. Touch your ear to indicate earring and then shine. Silver is a shiny metal. Show how the ray will shine off silver. Think of a white shirt, which you can use to recall the sign for white. Many of us have dark eyebrows, which you can use to recall the sign for black. Move the letter B down your cheek to indicate brown skin. Tan is a variation of the sign for brown. Form the letter T and move it down your cheek to indicate tan skin. Meat is flesh. Press the flesh of your hand between your index finger and thumb to represent meat. Gravy is liquid that drips from the meat. Peeling onions makes you cry. Twist the knuckle of your forefinger next to your eye to represent an onion. Gently tap the side of your head with your open hand so that your fingers show the lettuce leaves on the head of lettuce. Gently tap the side of your head with the letter C to represent a head of cabbage. You taste something and your subsequent gesture and facial expression clearly indicate it was delicious. Trace the pathway down your throat to indicate you're thirsty. A reinforcing facial expression is definitely appropriate. When we drink wine, our cheeks sometimes get flushed. Form the letter W and circle it over your cheek. Imagine you're holding some cheap piece of junk in your hand. Get rid of it by brushing it right off your hand. Someone might say that when you buy expensive things, you're often just throwing money away. I wouldn't say that, but somebody might. We want to give you a few more signs for states, which we've included in several of the following sentences. You already learned the sign for Arizona, which is based on the sign for dry. The sign for California is based on the sign for gold, which is linked to the California gold rush. Gold is shiny and often used to make earrings. Touch your ear to indicate gold in California.
To sign Texas, just form the letter X and move it across and down to approximate the general shape of the state. Hawaii is made by moving the letter H around the face like beautiful, because Hawaii is so beautiful.
As we've mentioned in Lesson 6, you indicate most states with finger-spelled abbreviations. If your state also has a sign and we haven't shown it to you yet, you should be able to easily learn what it is back in your home state. Here's the money in your hand. Now remove the cost of the item that you just bought. This is also the sign for price. Really use your imagination to see this is a surface with coins on it and you're dividing it between two people. My head represents the pig's head sticking out of a pool of mud. Mud may eventually dry up and break into dirt particles. You might want to recall this when you remember the sign for dirty. You learned the sign for breathe. An animal is a breathing creature, and this is a variation on the sign for breathe we use to sign animal. We all need air to live. Use the letter L on both hands as you represent the air flowing in and out of your lungs for the sign for life. This is also the sign for live. With A hands, it's the sign for address. The sign for young is similar to the sign for happy, with feelings rising in our chests. This is supposed to indicate the energy of youth when they're not parked in front of the TV set. When we're tired, our feelings are tired too, and show it. We are supposed to learn from our experiences, which often take a lifetime. Show the white hair of an older person to represent experience. Think about old Father Time when you sign his long beard to represent old. Make the movement twice for the sign for age. We see something new and scoop it up. You'll probably remember this sign best if you relate it to old movies where people often rolled over and died. This is also the sign for dead and death. There is a mound of dirt on a freshly dug grave. Use the letter C for church and establish it on a solid foundation. Use the letter S to sign synagogue. You learned the signs for eat and for bed. Home is a place where we eat and sleep. Point to the head like this to represent the government as the head of the nation. This also is the sign for state capital and nation's capital. You learned the sign for Earth with its axis attached. Now visualize this as one of the nations of the Earth. Use the letter N when you sign nation.
I don't have anything to add. Do you want to say anything?
The buttons on the commonly worn jacket are intended to bring China to mind. The sign for Scotland shows the Scots' common tartan plaid. This sign is related to the heritage of Australia as a place for England's undesirables. See how I hold an English undesirable with just 2 fingers, not wanting to dirty my hand too much. Then I circle the island and drop them off in Australia. The sign for Switzerland is represented by the large cross on its flag. The most common sign for Germany is a replication of the eagle on the German flag. However, you may also see Germany signed like this. Think of a German soldier's uniform at the turn of the century, which had a spike on top of the helmet. This is a modification of the sign for new and the letter Y for New York. Place the Y on your open palm and move it twice to indicate New York City and New York State. Outline the boot-shaped country using your thumb and index finger for Italy. You will also see the sign Italy. A Canadian Mountie shaking snow from the lapel of his overcoat is a sign for Canada. One sign you'll see for Mexico is based on the mustache often seen on Mexican men. Visualize the shawl of a Spanish señorita tied in front of you when you sign Spain. The sign for Japan shows the shape of the Japanese islands. The sign for Africa is represented by the face of the African continent. We remember America when we think of the logs at the corners of a log cabin. America. Can you picture a member of the English gentry posing for a portrait with one hand resting on top of the other? This is the sign for England. This motion of the letter F could be based on the first letter of France, the fleur-de-lis, or the handkerchief that members of the aristocracy carried. Take your pick. In remembrance of the potato famine, the sign for Ireland is the combination of the sign for nation and potato. Ireland. A tracing of the classic Greek nose with the letter G is a sign for Greece. The Russian dance is still a very recognizable characteristic in the sign for Russia. The sign for Egypt is based on the shape and angle of a pyramid. Indicating the beard of a Jewish rabbi is the sign for Israel. It's also the sign for Hebrew. The sign for India is based on the mark on the forehead worn by many Indians. And red?
One or two. Fred Rogers. You know, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is in Pittsburgh. Penguins, Stanley Cup 1991 and 92. 1 plus 9 plus 9 plus 1 or 2 equals 20 and 21, which means either 2 or 3 o'clock.
A volunteer willingly steps forward when asked. So the sign for volunteer is pulling yourself forward. This is also the sign for apply, as in applying for a job. We show a slave as someone whose wrists are bound by a rope. A person is free when he breaks out of the bonds of slavery. This is also the sign for freedom and liberty. The most common sign for lock is related to the concept of enslavement. If your hands become bound like this, it's as if they're locked and won't come apart. The sign for habit is related to the concept of enslavement. Think of yourself as a slave to a habit with your wrists bound by a rope. This downward motion shows the repetitiveness of the habit. Use the letter T for tradition. Form the letter C to represent a computer. Move it across your other hand, representing a table or desk. You just created a desktop computer. You'll also see computers signed like this. Visualize your thumbs as test tubes, which scientists use to pour and mix chemicals. Use the letter C to make the sign for chemistry. Use the letter B for biology. Use the letter E for experiment. Think of your index fingers as wires, which you touch together a few times to complete an electric current. The sign for physics is related to the sign for electricity. Use the index and middle fingers of both hands and touch them to complete an electric circuit. This sign looks like one of the motions an orchestra conductor uses to direct the musicians. Use the letter P to make this sign, and music becomes a sign for poetry. You learn the signs for wide and narrow. The sign for profession shows that a person has followed a very specialized career path. Travel along this path with the letter P for profession. Remember that a professional has followed a very narrow specialized career path. Grab some skills from this specialized career path and you're an expert. This is also the sign for skill. When we practice, we're trying to figuratively sharpen and polish our skills. The sign, however, shows a literal sharpening or polishing of your fingernails or the blade of a knife, whichever you prefer. Move the letter D across your teeth where your dentist would do her job. You might also see the sign dentist signed this way. Draw a question mark in the air to represent a question. A test is questions on paper. This is also the sign for exam. Put the letter F on paper and you failed at this assignment. This is also the sign for flunk. You can analyze something in front of you by digging down and probing for answers. Think of your hand as a car's ignition. Put your key in and turn it. This is also the sign for begin. Everything we want to talk about is in part 2.
So stay tuned.
You already know the natural signs for I and me. When you boast, you want to bring everyone's attention to yourself. Instead of using your index fingers, alternately point to yourself with your thumbs to represent boast. Like boast, a performer also wants to bring everyone's attention to her, but in a positive way. Alternately pointing to yourself with your thumbs while moving your hands in a circular manner represents perform. This is also the sign for acting, drama, theater, as well as a theatrical show and a play. Establish the blame by placing it on the back of your hand for all to see. Then let your thumb direct the blame toward the person deserving it. Be careful, it could also be pointed towards you. We all move our hands when we're doing something. At least that's the concept behind the sign for do. You'll also see do sign like this. This is also the sign for act and behave, although you may see some people sign behave forming the letter B on both hands. Party is a variation of the sign for do. Form the letter P while moving your hands back and forth in front of you. Play is another variation of the concept for do. Form the letter Y while moving your hands in different directions like this. Silly is another variation of the sign for play. Move the letter Y back and forth in front of your nose where you would make the sign for funny. Think of yourself as an artisan who is making something with your hands. With one fist over the other, hammer the material into shape. Show that you finished doing something. Start from this position, then move your hands out to show that your hands are empty. You're finished. This is also the sign for already, like I've already done it. When you make this sign, think of the saying, there's a place for everything and everything has its place. Show how each item has its proper place in front of you, from left to right. This is also the sign for prepare. This sign is a variation of the sign for order. You are less definite about the order and placement of items in front of you because you're arranging them as you move along from left to right. This is also the sign for prepare. Use the letter R for ready. Something is important if you move it from a lower position to a higher position. What you require is resting on your hand and you use your index finger to pull it towards you. This is also the sign for demand and insist. If you grab the brass ring, you've won. Think of your index finger as a knife with a sharp point that you touch and quickly move away from. If you're experiencing danger, it might be because someone is thrusting a knife in your direction. In this case, your thumb represents the knife coming toward you. This is also the sign for threaten. Use your index finger to represent a knife. Although this upward thrust does nothing to wound anybody, it sure does wound their pride. Think of your bent index fingers as a knife that you're repeatedly striking towards someone. This is certainly an extremely cruel way to tease someone and torment them. This is an underhanded activity like taking a payoff under the table. Think of your arm as a table as you steal your payoff with the other hand. Picture yourself getting back at someone by striking him from below. The sign for do is also the sign for act and behave. Although you may see some people sign behave forming the letter B in both hands, behave. The sign for perform is also the sign for acting, drama, theater, as well as a theatrical show and play.
And the sign for finished is also the sign for already. You'll encounter several of these words in the following practice sentences.
Back in Lesson 4, we taught you the signs for man, woman, boy, and girl. As we told you, these signs were created years and years ago, back when men wore top hats and women wore bonnets with ribbons. These signs were actually a preview of the content of this lesson.
The sign for work is another example of a sign created when a blacksmith used an anvil to really do a hard day's work. Another example is the sign for toast, which is made by toasting a piece of bread on a fork in front of a fire, before there was a toaster or an electrical outlet to plug it in.
One other example is a sign for control, which is based on using reins to control horses. Something not exactly as popular today as an automatic transmission. Along with these examples, we'll show you several dozen more signs that were also created in days gone by. School teachers used to clap their hands to get their students' attention, but I doubt it would be a successful strategy in classrooms today. You learn the signs for school and above. Put them together to show that a college is above a regular school by combining the elements of both signs. All diplomas have official seals. Form the letter G for graduate and stamp the seal on the diploma. This sign shows how paper passed through an old printing press. On typewriters and printing presses, imprints of the letters of the alphabet actually hit the paper. It was a custom in 18th century France to break a cracker for luck, and this is a sign based on that custom. This and many other French signs made their way to America with teacher Lorraine Claire. Before the toaster and the toaster oven, people made toast by piercing the bread and holding each side to an open flame. Before the salt shaker, people put salt on their food by placing the salt on a knife and tapping it so that the salt would fall onto their food. Think of yourself as a food taster when you make this sign. If you taste the food and it's edible, you offer it to someone as good to eat. Think of yourself as a food taster when you make this sign. If you taste the food and it's not edible, you show someone it's not good to eat by turning your hand so the food drops to the ground. Better means more good, or as a sign, a combination of good plus higher. Best means the most good, or as a sign, a combination of good plus highest. If you use an old-fashioned coffee grinder, you'll grind your beans like this, which is a sign for coffee. When soda was in bottles instead of cans or plastic bottles with twist tops, people used to put the bottle tops that went inside the bottle like this and close like this. This is also the sign for pop or cold drink. Although this has a very negative connotation, Coke soda is still signed like an injection of a narcotic. Before the drug companies sent out prepared medications, druggists used to mix the medicines themselves with a mortar and pestle. For the sign hospital, we show how medical staff would wear the Red Cross symbol on their sleeves. You'll also see the hospital sign like this with an H for hospital on a solid rock. Use the letter P to make the Red Cross symbol, and the sign for hospital becomes the sign for patient. This sign is based on the Greek letter psi, which is a symbol for psychology. People often make gestures with their hands as they make their speeches. This was especially true of early orators. This is also the sign for lecture and presentation. We've included a couple of signs that you should easily understand, even though we're not going to specifically teach them.
At this stage in your signing career, you need to have already developed a confidence that will allow you to trust yourself and take chances when you try to express yourself and understand others. Never turn off when you don't understand a particular sign. Just keep moving forward with the conversation. If you've obviously missed something important, ask to see a sign again, or even ask what a sign is that you don't know.
Can you picture a blacksmith hitting his hammer on an anvil? Now this was work. Busy is a variation of the sign for work. However, the action moves back and forth instead of up and down. Use one fist as the anvil and the other forming the letter B. This is also the sign for business. Use the letter F to sign function. A grindstone is a revolving stone disc for sharpening tools or polishing things. If you kept your nose to the grindstone, you were working hard and steadily. Sounds boring to me. You would control the horses pulling your carriage by holding and using the reins. This is also the sign for manage and administer. In days gone by, many sellers actually held up their wares for your inspection to encourage a sale. This is also the sign for store. Try this visual picture. You're broke and you're just barely keeping your head above water. On an old-fashioned scale, you move a weight until the metal bar is completely balanced. This sign shows the movement of that metal bar. You've probably seen a more modern version of these scales in your doctor's office. Before word processing and speech recognition programs were a reality, a secretary would take a pencil and take dictation. It's possible that this sign is based on the togas worn by the senators of ancient Rome that draped over their shoulders and were held up with clips. If not, you still can create that mental picture to remember this sign and related initialized signs. Form the letter S when you sign Senate. Use the letter C to sign Congress. Use the letter B to sign Board. Use the letter L to sign legislature. A captain's uniform used to have epaulets. This is also the sign for boss. George Washington's uniform had epaulets. Using the letter W and bringing it forward changes the sign for captain into the sign for Washington. George Washington, Washington State, or Washington, D.C. Since Lincoln's head is on a penny, the sign for Lincoln is similar to 1 cent. Place the letter L at your temple. This sign is based on the stubbled beard people thought of when they pictured a farmer. Shepherds today use electric shears, but they used to cut the wool with scissors. This sign was created when socks were commonly knitted at home. This sign is based on the clothing of rich people. Picture the elbow reinforcers on the jackets that rich people wore in their country estates. Modify the position of your hand to the letter Y to sign country like nation. The poor often wear old clothes with holes at the elbows. Can you visualize a pile of gold coins that a rich person would have? This is also the sign for wealthy. When you make an extra buck or two, you might just tuck this profit in your shirt pocket. This is also the sign for benefit and advantage. Can you picture a well-to-do man wearing suspenders? He may be seen holding his suspenders in this fashion while doing absolutely nothing. This is also the sign for vacation and holiday. You learn the signs for man and woman, which are partly based on the ruffled shirts worn in the 19th century. Just showing the ruffles on the blouses and the shirts worn by these ladies and gentlemen is a sign for polite. With this modification, the ruffled shirt is also the origin of the sign for fine. Visualize the fullness of ornate draperies in 19th century homes. This particular decoration became the sign for decorate and decoration. Can you picture a peasant wearing a helmet with horns? Well, it's based on the head coverings with buffalo horns worn by Native American chiefs. This is also the sign for superintendent.
Wow! Here we are at the last practice section of this beginning sign language video course. Well, we made it! And more importantly, you made it. Do you believe it? You now have more than a 1,000-word sign vocabulary.
Which can be used to communicate many, many more than 1,000 English vocabulary items when we include all the possible synonyms for those English words and English phrases and idioms.
True. Really? For sure. You bet. You also learn to use a variety of sign language grammatical features that enable you to convey much more information as you produce your signs.
And continuous practice, occasional interaction with other signers, and reminding yourself to be patient will enable you to use these grammatical features to communicate effectively.
And add all the information you communicate when you use appropriate facial expressions, and you're well prepared to communicate through sign language.
And well prepared also to make informed decisions about your future sign language instruction.